bloating predominantly affects women more than men.
Why is that?
There's a lot of crossover between conditions like PCOS, endometriosis, fibroids, which cause GI symptoms like bloating. It's not funny, but it affects a lot of women, and there's some sort of dark humor that women take on board is they get period poops, right? And that's because of the fluctuations in estrogen and progesterone during the cycle. There's lots of different types of fiber, and for some people there could be certain types of fiber known as high FODMAP fibers, which could cause more gas and bloating inherently. And if someone is having problems with fiber, it's a sign of something systemically wrong that needs to be recalibrated.
So the key is not then to vilify fiber, but it's to maybe just be more cautious with regards to like how rapidly you're titrating up your dose.
People say, no, we don't want iodized salt, we want Celtic sea salt or pink Himalayan salt. Pink Himalayan salt is actually not safe because it's not been decontaminized of heavy metals.
One super controversial food on social media today is oatmeal. Is oatmeal good for us or is it killing us slowly? Dr. Karan Rajan, welcome to the show. How you doing?
Thanks for having me, Max. It's great to be in California.
I'm super happy to have you. Our mutual friend, Dr. Darshan Shah, said that you were just the GOAT. And I wasn't all that familiar with your work, but then I've subsequently done a deep dive. I looked over your YouTube channel, which is super impressive, your Instagram content. And I love it because you're very successful at what I would say is doing the most difficult thing today on social media, and that is creating viral content that's not just super sensationalized, super fear-mongery. It's like very nuanced, evidence-based, but still like the engagement that you get is totally impressive. It's amazing.
Yeah, and honestly, I'm not going to sit here and say I'm an expert in all things, and I think I would be remiss if I said that, but I just love learning stuff, and I'm still learning stuff. And I love to share it with people. And hopefully that passion comes through with that nuance and just sharing really cool nuggets of information about health.
Yeah, you're so good at it. So I'm excited for this conversation. But let's just dive straight into the deep end. What would you say is one gut health myth that's doing the most harm right now and nobody realizes it's wrong?
So there's a ton to pick from, but the number one on my list would be I've seen an insane rise of carnivore keto enthusiasts who not just prioritizing saturated fat intake, but also being fiber deficient at the same time. And I think ultimately a lot of these anecdotal reports from carnivore enthusiasts suggest that they feel better despite being fiber deficient in the short term, but in the long term, we know that the effects of low fiber intake chronically is not good for not just digestive health, but other aspects of health in different body systems.
Yeah, I mean, fiber, what are the benefits of fiber? Because, there's obviously, there are probably many benefits, and there are many different types of fiber. But what would you say they're missing out on then?
So if we look at a timeline of fiber, the benefits vary according to how consistent you are. So if we went for a fiber-rich meal after this podcast, like in the first few hours or days of increasing fiber intake, you'll get some physical functional benefits, potentially more regularity, maybe help you with bloating and satiety and helping you feel full over a few hours to a few days. Over a few weeks, you start getting additional benefits with the bloating and regularity. You also start potentially getting some weight loss benefits because of the continued satiety you're feeling, but then you start to feel more energy, clarity, potentially better skin, and those could be consequences of the gut-brain axis, gut-skin axis, and then over months and years, you're getting some of those real metabolic benefits, lower LDL cholesterol, improved blood sugar control, and your HbA1c, which is a long-term marker of blood sugar control. And then over that sort of year mark, you're getting disease risk reduction, reduced risk of heart disease, reduced all-cause mortality, reduced risk of multiple cancers, just increasing your fiber intake by 10 grams, reduces your colon cancer risk by 10%. So it's that real timeline that you start to reap the benefits with consistency.
Wow. Why do some people, though, when they increase the amount of fiber that they're eating, then they'll report that they are seeing increased bloating Usually it's bloating, right? It's not increased constipation, but nonetheless, like increased like GI symptoms that can be uncomfortable.
Yeah, I would say it's like one of many causes. One thing could be that their baseline is quite low. So when they suddenly increase their fiber intake because a doctor or someone online says you need more fiber, they suddenly start packing in the fiber, which paradoxically actually gives more workload to the gut bacteria which ferment fiber, and suddenly they're overwhelmed because they're like, whoa, we didn't expect this huge shipment of fiber coming in. And there's a lot of gas production, and it takes a while for the gut bacteria to acclimatize and become proficient at metabolizing that fiber. The other thing is, back to a point we were talking about before, there's lots of different types of fiber. And for some people, there could be certain types of fiber known as high FODMAP fibers, like inulin, fructooligosaccharides, galactooligosaccharides, which could cause more gas and bloating inherently. And foods which contain these things like inulin and fructooligosaccharides are things like bananas, things like garlic, artichokes, leeks. And so those types of food and even supplements which contain those can increase bloating. So multiple things going on there.
So the key is not then to vilify fiber, but it's to maybe just be more cautious with regards to like how rapidly you're titrating up your dose.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if you start pretty fiber naive around, if you're just consuming 10 grams a day, I wouldn't immediately go to 30, which is the recommended daily intake. Week 1, your protocol could be increasing a daily target by 5 grams. Week 2, increase by another 5, and then you slowly titrate up. It's all in the dose and what works for you, and allow your bacteria to adapt to the fiber load, and eventually you'll become pretty proficient within a month.
Wow. How much fiber are people on Western diets typically consuming today?
The commonly quoted statistic is around 95% of people, depending on where you are consuming under 15 grams of fiber a day, which, the baseline target recommended by most guidelines seems to be around 30. But if we look at non-industrial populations who are eating over 100 grams a day and have the lowest risk of chronic disease anywhere else in the world, we are falling significantly short of that.
Yeah, I love this conversation. I mean, I'm still, my first book, Genius Foods, came out in 2018, and the manuscript was written primarily in 2016. And I still think that my, not to pat myself on the back, but like my chapter on the gut microbiome in that book, it holds up. And I remember just my mind being blown with regards to all the research that I was reading about, fiber and microbiota accessible carbohydrates and their impact on the gut mucosa and all this stuff. It's just super interesting stuff. And I know that fiber can be controversial, but to me, it's not. I mean, it's like it seems like all roads, when looking at all the different types of evidence that are out there, all roads lead to fiber for most people being a benefit.
Wow, it's amazing that you were so eloquent about the microbiome in 2016, because that was an era in which very few people were talking about the microbiome compared to now. You see microbiome washing everywhere nowadays, right? And yeah, it sounds like you were exactly, you hit the nail on the head there, because it does more than just create poop, the colon. Like it's a real powerhouse for metabolic health, immune health, and beyond. And so, yeah, it is vilified somewhat, but I think if someone is having problems with fiber, it's a sign of something systemically wrong that needs to be recalibrated. So almost, and might sound a bit harsh saying this, but if you are feeling bloated when you're consuming fiber, you almost need to just go through the pain and bloating somewhat to really reap the benefits. I mean, a little bit of bloating is expected when you increase your fiber intake. Chronic bloating and pain is something to see your doctor about, but you need to, go through some of the discomfort with fiber when you're starting off. Do
you think there's merit to the carnivore diet as a therapeutic diet, maybe as a temporary diet, as a sort of like as a reset of sorts?
I've changed my mind somewhat on this in terms of just adding some nuance. And I know there are so many reports from people on carnivore diet saying, I feel great, my skin's better, my pooping's better. And, it's hard to argue with someone's personal life and someone's personal evidence. And I never want to take that away from someone. But most of the evidence we have on large population studies don't show the effects of carnivore diets long term. They sort of cap out around like the 6-month stage. And I think to truly understand, we need to see what the long-term impact of a carnivore diet is. And those people who supposedly feel better on a carnivore diet, I would love for them to potentially assess their microbiome, maybe a microbiome test to just look at the functionality of the different species they've got, the concentration of different species of bacteria they've got. I think that would be interesting to see, because it's unquestionable that for most humans, fiber does an important, disease risk reduction play. And so ultimately, I would say if there is a way that, fine, keep your carnivore up, but is there a way to still get in some fiber? Not necessarily from like plants or fruit. Is there some way? I mean, I'd be interested to see if that continues to help you some more. But ultimately, I think if someone feels good, I'm not going to come in and say, hey, no, you need to do this because the evidence says this. Because I think as doctors and as health interested people, we look at the middle of the bell curve where everyone sits. But some of these people, these carnivore enthusiasts, may be outliers, where they may be the rare case where they have some rare condition or something which actually lends themselves to perform better on low fiber intakes. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate that perspective, and I would agree. So when looking at the different types of fiber that are available to consumers today, I mean, you've got your the food matrix presents soluble fiber, insoluble fiber, there's resistant starch. Maybe you can give us a lay of the land in terms of the different types of fiber that we should be seeking out in our diets.
Yeah, so to that point about soluble, insoluble, resistant starches, that was the prevailing theory or model for a while. And there's some more contextualization that's been added now. I think for most people to understand, that's a really good concept. But if you wanted to go deeper into the weeds on fiber, it's actually more useful to think about the viscosity of the fibers, the fermentability of the fibers, and the solubility of the fibers as well, and the prebiotic potential, right? Because prebiotic fibers are the ones that do the real heavy lifting for your microbiome. The sort of other fibers which are mainly insoluble, they're good for adding bulk, but they don't do much else in terms of influencing the microbiome. So highly soluble, highly fermentable and low viscosity fibers are really well tolerated as well. And so things like the ones you get from beans, right? They're usually pretty well tolerated, very high solubility, high fermentability, and have high prebiotic function as well. But if we took it back to that sort of broad model, most fruits and vegetable will have some prebiotics, a mix of soluble and insoluble and resistant starches. And what I would say is, more than focusing on specific foods, just try and get as much diversity as you can. Because what's the most important thing is, and I like to think of your colon and your intestines as the world map. And if you think of each part of your colon as a different continent, the right part is continent 1, the middle part, the transverse colon, is continent 2, and the last part, the distal colon or the descending colon, is continent 3. There are different populations of bacteria which live in each continent. They all like to consume slightly different foods and then produce different byproducts as a result. If we keep having a narrow intake of the same fibers, like we just eat broccoli and tomatoes and onions every single day, that's great, but not good. Because you need even more diversity to feed all the different continents and all the different bacteria, which like their own little food types.
So it's great, but it's not ideal.
It's not ideal, yeah. So actually, next time you go to the supermarket or the grocers, is there something unique you've never tried before? Like, hey, how do I cook this eggplant or okra? Should I just add that in? Because some of those foods, and especially foods which are like tuberous and root-based, cassavas and sweet potatoes and some of those foods, they're even more hardier to digest. And they make their way all the way to the distal colon, where you get the type of bacteria which are mostly butyrate producers. And that's real gold dust for your colonocytes, the cells of the colon.
Yeah, it's I've become obsessed with the concept of dark matter in food. I was listening to a previous guest of the show, Ty Beal, who's a nutrition scientist. He has his own podcast now, and on it he had a guest, Stephen Van Vliet, I think is his name, and he was talking about the dark matter in food. When assessing the nutrition of a food, there's what the nutrition facts panel presents, but then there's all these countless chemicals in food that we have yet to even name, let alone measure their impact on human health. And so it's like when you're when you're choosing a diverse array of foods, it's like you're hedging your bets. You're getting in all of these varied nutrients that are interacting with these trillions of microbes in a way that, like, I mean, we have like some idea of what they're doing, but I mean, there's probably countless ways in which, you know, these foods that we have co-evolved with are positively impacting health.
If you go to your Whole Foods or Trader Joe's and you pick up a pack of raspberries. The raspberries has some total grams of sugar, maybe some dietary fiber, tells you the carbs, etc. It doesn't tell you the total polyphenol content or the antioxidant content, right? And we know polyphenols have this anti-inflammatory effect. Polyphenols actually so if you think of prebiotics as like a sword, you know, it's like the armor for bacteria to go and fight. You're giving them ammunition, right? Polyphenols are like the shield. So now they've got the sword and they've got the shield. Polyphenols increase the efficacy and power of prebiotics. So they actually work in tandem and synergize. So when you have a fruit like a raspberry, which has got natural fibers and prebiotics and polyphenols, you've actually got like a real superpower food in one. And most people don't know that because it's not in the facts panel, right? And same for like fatty fish. It's got omega-3 acids, which are also a type of prebiotic. And yeah, like to your point, there are so many of these hidden nutrients within food. And I think it's a bit of a shame that most people don't know about this because it's not on the supplements panel and most people won't go and do their own reading. And even in medical school, I wasn't taught any of this. This is all post hoc analysis and post hoc readings and self-learning.
It's so cool. Yeah. And there's like, I love when learning about the different foods that are available, like, you know, counterintuitively, you'll hear stuff like raspberries, like one single serving of raspberries has like a crazy amount of fiber.
Yeah, I think if you have a cup, it's like 7 or 8 grams of fiber.
That's like almost a third of your daily requirement for fiber.
Yeah, amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A pear has, like, if I recall correctly, 7 grams of fiber in it.
Yeah, large pear, half an avocado, 5 grams. It's like pretty substantial amounts.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
One super controversial food on social media today is oatmeal. Mm-hmm. Can you separate fact from fiction for us? Is oatmeal good for us or is it killing us slowly?
Yeah, again, you know, the nuances and the detail. I don't know where this came from. And I think this sort of fear of oatmeal, which seems like a food that's been around for hundreds of years, seems to be around the topic of like glyphosate potentially, and that is the danger that people assume. But if you actually just look macroscopically, it's high in both fiber and high in protein as well. For its concentration, pretty good. And I would say as a food, it's pretty versatile. Going specifically to the fiber content, it's very rich in a type of specific prebiotic called beta-glucans. And beta-glucans have a direct role at lowering cholesterol because it's a type of soluble fiber, and it binds bile acids, which contain cholesterol, and excrete it in your stool. So it's great for that. There's also preliminary research suggesting that the beta-glucans you can find in oats, barley, and things like that can actually bind microplastics and help to excrete microplastics from our body as well. So from that point of view, I would say it's pretty great. And also the protein content as well. And most people can easily make oatmeal and make porridge and overnight oats, which then they can add chia seeds to, raspberries to. So as a food which lowers the entry barrier to cook a nutritious meal, I think it fits in so well with most people's busy, stressful lives, and it doesn't require them to make a gourmet meal. So for me, it's tick, tick, tick.
Yeah. Much is made about the blood, the quote unquote, in air quotes, I'm using blood sugar spike from a food like oatmeal. Does that concern you? Is it population specific? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, there's a ton of stuff which could spike your blood glucose, right? You could go for a run, go to the gym, you'll get a physiological rise in your blood sugar. You eat any meal, you'll get a rise, then a dip. And oatmeal is packaged obviously with sugar, but also fiber, which slows down the absorption of glucose, as with most natural foods. I mean, we wouldn't say, hey, don't eat that apple, don't eat that raspberry because it's going to spike your blood sugar. It's contained with fiber, so that's the good thing. And I would say that, again, context specific, right? So if you're consuming an excess of calories and you are pre-diabetic or diabetic, it's worth monitoring your blood sugar to see what foods are worsening that. For the average person who is not having any insulin resistant issues, I wouldn't worry about the glucose spikes from a nervous system or metabolic point of view. If you are interested in tracking your blood sugar and just having those data points to see what different foods do, I think that's useful to learn more about your body. But I wouldn't worry about that if you didn't have any pre-diabetes or diabetes.
I completely agree. I've had people on the podcast in the past who I probably, I may have on again, people who are friends of mine, but who I think make a big deal about blood sugar spikes as if carbohydrates are inherently fattening or are inherently promotive of insulin resistance. I don't think that that's the case. I think that it ultimately comes down to energy balance. And if you're over fat past your own personal genetic fat threshold, then you'll develop insulin resistance. But is our acute blood sugar spikes causing chronic elevations of blood sugar, which is what we ultimately want to be worrying about? I don't think so.
Anecdotally, there's several patients I've seen in GI clinic over the years who got caught up in this CGM blood sugar monitoring frenzy to the point where they would start prioritizing foods which would help them blunt the glucose spike, which is high fat foods. And then following them up several months later, they would come back in with gallstones because of the high fat food and high cholesterol, and high fat foods can trigger gallstone risk. And they would come in with potentially acid reflux, and actually their triglyceride panels would be higher as well. So the downside is you can build in disordered eating habits if you tell someone to obsessively track one single metric, like BMI. Who focuses just on BMI? It's about muscle mass. It's about all these other things. So I think you can get into risky territory there.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's also like if you want to eat a banana or enjoy a piece of fruit, and your thinking is like, well, I've got to blunt the blood sugar spike, so I'm going to add a whole bunch of like fatty foods on top of that. You're just adding calories. Like if you didn't, assuming you didn't also intend on eating those fatty foods, to eat a banana and then think, oh, to make this banana healthy, I've got to go and add a bunch of fat on top of it.
Yeah.
Put a tablespoon of coconut oil into my fruit smoothie.
Peanut butter.
Peanut butter, whatever. You're just adding calories. Like I could see that ultimately leading to weight gain.
And also, it's kind of a similar model where someone eats something and then feels they've got to burn the calories off to make it rewardable. So, I've just eaten some fries. I need to now do the treadmill for an hour to burn the 300 calories. It seems a bit like stressful.
Yeah, totally. All right, so let's go back to the fiber conversation because I think it's fascinating. There's a lot of fiber supplements now on the market. You are coming out with one. You gave me a sample of one before we got rolling downstairs, and I thought it was great.
Thank you.
But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of options on the market now. How do consumers know what to look out for when choosing a fiber supplement? Does everybody need a fiber supplement? What do we need to know?
Yeah, I think no supplement can ever replace diet and making sure all the big buckets of your health are taken care of. But, as the name suggests, they're a supplement or an adjunct to a lifestyle. And, modern life happens. We know the nutrient quality of the soil has deteriorated over the decades. People travel, they're stressed, they're busy, there are gaps in the diet. So supplements exist to fill those gaps and sometimes enhance the things like, creatine or even fiber or omega-3s. And I think in our modern day where people are struggling to hit that 30 gram per day target, supplements, especially fiber supplements, can be handy. Like, I've been traveling across the US this whole month. It's been difficult to keep up to date with over 30 grams of fiber. So I've got a few sachets in my backpack, but I just, take once a day. So that's handy from that point of view. So I think it's like a handy insurance, like a multivitamin for your gut almost, right? If you think about it from that point of view. And when someone is looking at fiber supplements in the market, you need to look at a few things. So, purity testing. Is it a monofiber? So is it a single fiber or is it a blend of different fibers? Right? Does it promise to do more than just help you poop? I think the kind of baseline entry fee for any fiber supplement, which shouldn't even be spoken about, is that it should help you poop. Like, that's not a bonus. That's like baseline. And actually, does that fiber supplement have prebiotic potential? A very common incumbent fiber supplement is like the likes of psyllium husk. I won't mention the name, but companies beginning with M, Schmetter Schmusil, right? So that's basically psyllium husk with some orange flavoring and additives and sugars. Now, it doesn't have a great mouthfeel. It's a monofiber. Psyllium husk has very low prebiotic potential, which means it doesn't have the ability to really manipulate your microbiome in a positive way. So actually, good things you can look for are the fibers contained within clinically validated? Do they have their own studies behind it that you can search up? Is it multiple fibers in one? Is there any third-party testing? And you can go on the website and look at the certificates of authenticity and verification, and actually what is the user experience and what are some other social proof points and reviews of that fiber? And finally, what's the price point? I believe that a fiber supplement probably shouldn't be more than maybe $1.50, $2 per serving for one dose, and some are extortionate. So those are some basic things you can look for, I think.
Yeah. What about the there's a lot of among ultra processed foods today, which we talk about a lot on the podcast, the potential harms associated with over consuming them. You'll see commonly now the fiber fortification of ultra processed foods. Even some soft drinks like sodas.
Yeah. So the problem is a lot of those fibers that are food fortified with fibers, and even those sodas, prebiotic sodas, they use the cheapest kind of commodity fibers they can. Because the main thing is, especially beverages are expensive to produce. The cans and the shipping, it's heavy stuff, and even food as well. And, having been in the industry now, looking at the back end of what are the cost of goods and the shipping and stuff like that, food and beverage is expensive. For a company to create a food product like a fiber bar or a protein bar, it can be quite expensive. So then when they're adding in that functional food like a protein or a fiber or something else, they try and find either fairy dust doses, right? So they can then say, oh, we're high fiber, 3-4 grams of fiber, or they use the cheapest possible fiber they can. And commonly that's stuff like inulin, fructooligosaccharides, which ferment rapidly and can cause bloating. And specifically when you look at prebiotic sodas, someone who needs a prebiotic or a fiber is likely someone who maybe has gut issues, and the most common gut symptom is bloating. Now, soda and bloating are not a match made in heaven.
Right.
So it doesn't make sense to have a gut health soda because it's going to worsen bloating.
What are the most common instigators of gas and bloating today for people?
I would say it is paradoxically potentially not eating enough fiber, and then you've got dysbiosis and imbalance in your microbiome, and actually the dysbiosis can result in inflammation in the gut lining and these leaky gut type symptoms, and that pro-inflammatory state is causing chronic symptoms like potentially diarrhea, constipation, bloating, general abdominal pain, and so that's a result of an imbalanced microbiome. And I would say probably excessive consumption of sodas and a lot of air swallowing as well, excessive use of chewing gums and things like that, where you're just swallowing a lot of air, aerophagia, and that contributing to the bloating. But we also need to recognize that actually bloating predominantly affects women more than men.
Why is that?
And the reason is because, women there's a lot of crossover between conditions like PCOS, endometriosis, fibroids, which cause GI symptoms like bloating. I mean, bloating is probably one of the top symptoms of endometriosis from a GI point of view. And so, it's a different conversation, but sometimes they are misdiagnosed as gut issues because they present with that. And so there's, a whole world in which there's an overlap of female health conditions and gut conditions.
So this is far outside of my wheelhouse, but just as a curious outsider, should women be bringing up symptoms like bloating to their OB-GYNs?
It's a very good question, because the truth is the medical institution has categorized a lot of women's health conditions like endometriosis as just a gynecological disorder. So women are trained to think that they should only report pelvic symptoms to their OB-GYN. So if I'm bleeding heavily, if I'm getting pelvic pain or some vaginal discharge or pelvic discomfort, that is a sign to worry about, and let me tell my OB-GYN, and then I don't tell them about the constipation or the diarrhea or the chronic abdominal pain or the cramps and the bloating. And those could be secondary symptoms of a condition affecting them from a female health point of view and a reproductive point of view. So absolutely, anyone, because all these different doctors need to work in tandem.
Yeah. And do GI symptoms for women change for premenopausal women change in accordance with where they are in their cycle?
Oh, yeah, a ton, because very commonly, and it's not funny, but it affects a lot of women, and there's some sort of, I think, a bit of dark humor that women take on board is they get period poops, right? And that's because of the fluctuations in estrogen and progesterone during the cycle. So the waxing and waning of the different graphs of estrogen and progesterone can cause either increased gut motility or decreased gut motility and lead to either constipation or diarrhea or both, because, women have estrogen and progesterone receptors in their guts.
Is there anything from a dietary standpoint that can be done to help alleviate those symptoms?
So a lot of these menstrual or period-related symptoms are exacerbated by estrogen. They're estrogen dominant and estrogen driven. Even some of the symptoms in things like PCOS and endometriosis. So actually, there was an interesting study which showed that women who were in the highest quartile intake for fiber, specifically soluble fiber, actually had lower rates of menstrual-related symptoms like cramps and even menorrhagia. And the reason is soluble fiber helps to increase the clearance of estrogen from the colon. And so you get less estrogen-dominant symptoms. If you don't have a high fiber intake, the estrogen can be reabsorbed by the colon and recirculated in the liver and continue to cause those symptoms. So fiber also in that gut hormone axis is pretty effective.
I love learning about this stuff because, again, it's like so far outside of my wheelhouse. Should women be titrating up or down their dietary fiber in accordance with what phase of their cycle they're in?
No, I think it's always good to maintain a high fiber intake, and especially in that menopause stage where you get a lot of gut dysbiosis. And actually, that's probably when you should even more be thinking about diversity and prioritizing fiber intake. So fiber is never like a bad thing to take. The caveat would be that if you've got specific women's health conditions like endometriosis and you have a lot of gut symptoms, you should be careful with the types of foods that you consume. Because there was another recent study which came out, a systematic review of dietary intake and how it could affect or improve symptoms in endometriosis. They found that actually consuming low FODMAP foods helped slightly with endometriosis symptoms. And that may be because there was some overlap with gut sensitivities because of the endometriosis, making the gut more sensitive. And so actually sort of those more gentle fibers are quite effective in some of those conditions.
Wow. No, this is probably mind-blowing to a lot of my female listeners and super helpful information. Let's talk about probiotics, because there's a lot that are marketed today. A lot of misconceptions, but probably also a lot of very valuable use cases for them. So what do we need to know about probiotics?
Yeah, I mean, I've changed my mind a lot on probiotics as the science has evolved. Initially, I was, binary no. I don't think they're there. And then I changed my mind. I admitted there was like some nuance missing in, what I had previously thought. And I think it depends on the use case, what function you're using it for. And so I still believe that right now we are yet to unlock the science of a general wellness probiotic that you or I, without any chronic medical conditions, could take every day and experience an optimization or boost to our normal function. I don't think that exists right now. If we have a specific condition like IBS subtype C or bloating or post-antibiotic diarrhea, there are specific strains of probiotics that could help, and you need to look them up. And the key thing is, when you are looking up a probiotic, you need to look at these three things: the genus, the species, and the strain ID. So if you go to your supermarket and you're looking at an over-the-counter probiotic, look at the back of the pack. If it says Lactobacillus rhamnosus GG, there's 3 parts to it. The third part is often a combination of letters and numbers. That is a real probiotic. And using the strain ID and the whole thing, you can then take that, put that into PubMed, which is a repository of research papers, and find all the clinical trials associated with that strain ID. If you go to another supermarket and you find a probiotic that says Lactobacillus rhamnosus, no GG or no third part to it, That is not a real probiotic. And so we don't know what that does, what's in there, and there's no point buying that because that won't do anything. So it needs to be a specific use case, and it needs to be something that has the genus, species, and strain.
Are there specific conditions or symptoms that you would say there's sufficient evidence to warrant the inclusion of a probiotic in one's regimen? I once had it was food poisoning or something. I was like traveling abroad. I was in Brazil, and I once got like deathly sick after lunch at a churrascaria, and I had to go to the. I couldn't stand. I was like puking. I was like diarrhea. It was like I thought I was gonna die, and I ended up like my brother ended up like carrying me to the local emergent care. And they gave me, I needed like an IV of fluids, but they also gave me some strain of probiotic that they often give for people with traveler's diarrhea.
Yeah, so I guess that may have been Saccharomyces boulardii.
That's what it was, yeah.
So that has really good evidence for traveler's diarrhea, certain types of gastroenteritis, post-antibiotic diarrhea as well. Sometimes if you're on antibiotics, it's worth speaking to your healthcare practitioner who could maybe prescribe a probiotic, which can either help to reduce the chance of post-antibiotic diarrhea, or if you get it, reduce the duration for which you have it. So that's a very good use case. There are certain types of pediatric gut infections for which it's also useful. Necrotizing enterocolitis, which could be a life-threatening pediatric infection. There's some use case for that. Certain types of bloating associated with IBS. Constipation associated with IBS. There's so many subtypes of conditions, and I would say there's maybe a dozen use cases which have been studied for specific conditions for which I would say we have pretty strong evidence for that you could use them, and there's even some which evidence for reducing the risk of upper respiratory tract infections as well. So I think there is evidence there, but find out why you need it. Not just hey, I just want to improve and optimize my gut health. Let me take a probiotic. We're far from the science for that.
And also, taking a probiotic unnecessarily or the wrong type of probiotic can actually, cause unintended symptoms, right? Consequences like potentially SIBO even, right?
Yeah, you've got to imagine that, these are live organisms and you're transplanting them and making them colonize in some place that is alien to them, right? They're not your natural bacteria. They're kind of aliens that you're trying to integrate into a well-functioning society. And so there's lots of sharp elbows and stuff going on. And there's there could be some little internal battles going on when the new neighbors move in, and then there's an increased population of the new ones that are settling, and then everyone else, is decrease in population. And so the infighting can manifest as some gut disturbances. And I think you have to be careful in that instance, exactly to your point.
Yeah. What are some, switching gears, one of the things I love about your content, you debunk a lot of myths on social media, myths that are circulating, unnecessary fear-mongering. What are some wellness-related, maybe nutrition-related myths that you wish would just die?
That's a good question. I think, people have this obsession, like chemophobia, the fear of chemicals is especially abundant right now, where they'll take a food or an ingredient that sounds complex, right? Like citric acid or something like that. It's vitamin C. And, if you actually read the chemical breakdown of a blueberry, there's a wonderful image that someone created of these different fruits, like a blueberry, an orange, an apple, and broke down what the actual chemical composition is of each one. They are 12, 15, 20 letter long things in the blueberry. But no, it's natural. I mean, natural doesn't equal safe all the time, and artificial doesn't have to be equal unsafe. I mean, asbestos is natural, but no one would argue that it's safe, right? And just because something is potentially man-made, or even it sounds complex, we don't need to have an irrational fear of that potentially. And so for me, I think that obsession, in that chemophobia is one thing. And another thing which, really is worrying is we're sort of really in this state online where extreme opinions seem to matter, and there's a loss of nuance in the middle. And online there's constantly people debunking everyone to the point of it getting sometimes a bit personal.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I don't know, like if someone was personally attacking me rather than the concept I was talking about, I would feel a bit bullied.
Yeah. The whole chemophobia thing I think is fascinating, and I completely agree that the appeal to nature fallacy, it's a slippery slope. But on the other hand, I like to steelman those that are afraid of excess synthetic chemicals in their food, because I think that those concerns are warranted, particularly in a time when 75% of the items in your average supermarket are ultra processed, and we've gotten it wrong in the past. For think about how many decades partially hydrogenated oils were legally able to be pumped into our foods, and we now know only decades later, after countless millions of people have been exposed to those fats, that there's no safe level of trans fat, of artificially produced trans fat consumption.
Yeah, there's I completely agree with that. Like, we want to be encouraging people to cook as much as they can with ingredients from scratch, 100%. But then sometimes this chemophobia takes this route of actually vilifying things which have had huge public health impacts, right? Yeah. Like the fortification of cereals with iron, right? Which is huge. And then you see videos online of someone using a magnet on cereal and being like, look, there's iron in the cereal. I mean, yeah, it's there for a reason. Or, iodized salt. That's directly reduced the incidence of thyroid goiters and raised the IQ of children over the decades. And then people saying, no, we don't want iodized salt. We want Celtic sea salt or pink Himalayan salt. Pink Himalayan salt is actually not safe, because it's not been, decontaminized of heavy metals. It's sort of excavated from the mountains, and it's not sort of filtered and produced in the way that commercial salt is. So it's actually probably more harmful from a heavy metal standpoint. So actually, that's where the sort of real chemophobia takes its effect.
Yeah. So how do you suggest consumers then make sense of all of the fear mongering that they see on social media? Does it ultimately come down to just be careful who you follow? Yeah,
and before I even say that, I will say right now, just because someone has a doctor before their name or wears a stethoscope or wears scrubs, that means nothing. Literally means nothing, right? Someone without any credentials can give you amazing information, right? You're not a doctor, but you give some of the best information on food science, nutrition online.
Thank you.
And I know many doctors who have loads of post-nominals, but who give terrible information online and dangerous information. So the title itself means nothing. That's an authority bias play. And so I would say if someone is speaking in extremes constantly, that for me is a red flag to dive deeper into things. And ultimately, whether it's my content or anyone else's content, short-form social media lacks nuance. Generally, you can't pack everything into 60 seconds or even a minute or even a minute 30. And use that as a springboard to learn more about the topic. So say I do a video talking about the gut microbiome. Great, that sounds great. I've learned a little bit. Let me take that video and then do my own research. And that's the only way, by cross-referencing stuff with your own research, you will begin to know if it's real or bullshit.
Amen. Yeah. I mean, I think it's so incredible that we live in a time where, you have essentially access to all of the world's knowledge at your fingertips 24 hours a day. I mean, even prior to AI, like with Google. I mean, I'm largely an autodidact. I try to be as rigorous as I possibly can with my research, despite not having a formal academic background. But now we have AI, which I think is incredible. And I'm not saying that AI is perfect. It definitely makes mistakes. I mean, I've seen it and I've challenged it, and it will make mistakes. But we're just at like version 1.0 of the potential of what AI has to offer in terms of our health literacy, our science literacy. So, I mean, I think people definitely ought to cultivate, a critical lens through which they view any advice that they receive online.
I think AI can be useful as this sort of, unpaid intern, right? And not as a mentor to teach you things. And I think a simple use case that a lot of people can benefit from is actually asking AI to build them a simple high protein, high fiber meal plan or something like that. And it's fairly accurate at stuff like that because it's learning from the millions of food blogs and websites out there where people are giving free recipes. Like the New York Times have a healthy high protein salad recipe. It's learning from that and putting it here. So actually it's pretty good at that sort of population based simple task. Like, hey, make me a high protein, high fiber breakfast idea. It will do that. Or make me a chest workout plan. I think that's great as a starting point, right? Instead of paying a personal trainer to do an expensive program, who'll probably just use ChatGPT, you've cut the middleman out. But if it's like, tell me if I should take this supplement for my personal medical condition, be careful. Because we don't know the degree of hallucinations which could affect you. And if it's inaccurate, if it's safe, that's the only thing.
Yeah, you definitely have to be careful with it. My favorite thing to do with it is, you know how like researchers or even physicians will get together and have like a journal club about like the latest research coming out? I realized that I could do this fairly recently. I will literally upload like a PDF of a new study like into ChatGPT, and I'll like not debate, but I'll have like a back and forth with it about the strengths and the weaknesses of the study and what it found and what its limitations were. And it's really interesting because who else would I be able to do that with?
So it's like you've got your own mini journal club,
exactly.
which is great.
That's exactly what I do with it. Yeah, it's super fun. What about, so with regards to the gut microbiome, obviously diet plays a huge role, and I think we've covered some amazing information there. But what about from a lifestyle standpoint? One of the concepts that I find to be fascinating with regards to the microbiome and ultimately, our risk for autoimmune conditions and the like is the hygiene hypothesis. Have you done any research there? What can you share about curating an environment to support gut health?
Yeah, so we've, I guess, moved from the hygiene hypothesis to something called the old friends hypothesis, right? And the old friends are these microbes which have coexisted and grown with us over the millennia. And we know that a hyper-sterilized environment may not be the best for the microbiome, but also that doesn't mean a pathogenic environment is good, right? So just because you shouldn't use alcohol gel on your hands every single time you go outside, it also doesn't mean that you shouldn't wash your hands after you do number 2, right? So there's like a balance. We know from epidemiological research that kids who grow up in non-urban environments, who grow up in farms or around pets, have lower autoimmune disease risks and lower allergy risk in their lifetime compared to kids who grow up in urban environments without pets and without older siblings. So all of those factors, which are germ-inducing factors like having a dog that's running around from the outside to inside, being around farms, older siblings going to school, coming back, picking up a flu from daycare. Those are all good things overall because it's training your immune system from a young age, right? The exposure to different microbial species, going out in nature and being exposed to the different airborne microbiome. We've got different sort of bacteria floating around our environment. I'm experiencing a new microbiome just simply coming to the US and then coming to your house, right? We are inadvertently sharing our own microbiomes. So all of these things are pretty cool from a diversity exposure play. And, we know that kids who grow up in those super sterilized environments may have weaker immune systems, and that could manifest as an increased risk of autoimmune disease, allergy risk, which is why in the Western world, peanut allergies, I think it's 1 in 10 kids have peanut allergies. But I was born in Mumbai. I was in Mumbai virtually up until the age of 5. No one in my school, no one in my family, no one in my community had a peanut allergy, right? It's very rare in non-Western countries. It's probably slightly increasing now because the general kind of microbiome loss of diversity in most countries. But, there's still a stark disparity between non-Western and Western countries when it comes to autoimmune disease and allergy risk as well. So all of those things are good. Pets are good, nature's good, and non-urban environments are good.
Can you unpack the recent findings for us with regards to peanut exposure within the first year of life and the massive reduction, it seems, that coincided for peanut allergies?
Yeah, there was a fantastic multi-year long study called the LEAP trial. It was done in the UK and essentially showed once a kid is weaning and is starting to consume solids in paste form or actual solid food, introducing potential allergens like eggs, like peanuts, whether it's like a peanut puff or a little scoop of peanut butter, is actually priming the immune system to recognize that allergen and not overreact to it. And I can't off the top of my head remember the specific stat, but there is a huge, multiple double-digit percentage risk reduction in lifetime allergy or peanut allergy risk. So actually, after the kid is several months old in that sort of first year of life, if you are beginning to give them peanuts, that's a good thing because it's going to reduce their peanut allergy risk, which, is potentially a life-saving gift that you're giving a kid.
But why did anybody ever think that it made sense to withhold these kinds of common foods from children, from infants?
I think it's like the changing science, and then I actually don't know. I think it's something which was a miss for many, many years. And thankfully, we have the science to suggest that actually introducing at a low dose some of these allergenic foods is a good thing. And it goes back to, decades ago. My parents never thought about, should we give him this? They just gave me whatever they were eating, whether it was blended up or in paste form, and I ate whatever they gave me, whether it was like spinach or eggs or, like a little bit of chickpeas or whatever. And you just get that diversity, which is great for your microbiome.
Is autoimmunity on the rise in India and allergies, general allergies, allergy prevalence as common in India as it is here in the US?
I would assume that overall the incidence may be going up due to an increase in population, but also people adopting highly westernized habits and the general loss of biodiversity in our internal ecosystem. But I would still say the prevalence is probably significantly less than in Western countries, just because the dietary diversity, the fiber intake, the food type, and it's still less industrialized than Western worlds. So I would say overall the disease burden is less than in Europe or the US.
Yeah. I was just in London, and I love any chance I get to be there. And one thing that I thought was really, there's so much that I love about London. I love being in England in general. The full English breakfast is like my favorite thing. I'm obsessed. And I love the supermarkets there, like Waitrose.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
You have Colin the Caterpillar.
Never been there. What's that?
No, it's you get that in Waitrose.
What is it?
Marks and Spencer's. It's these like jelly kind of caterpillars. It's called Colin caterpillars, like a gummy.
Interesting.
That you can get, and it's like a weird UK thing.
They had I bought like rice cakes that had a salt and vinegar flavor, which like I love salt and vinegar, but it's impossible to find rice cakes like salt and vinegar rice cakes here, which is something that I'm really bummed about.
Really? I would have thought you get so much more diversity in the US. I'm surprised.
No, flavor. My favorite beef jerky on the planet is it's a British brand called Billy Frank's. They sell it at the Whole Foods there in Kensington.
Yes, it's the only one.
That's the only one. Yeah, I enjoy staying in Kensington because I can walk to I go to a gym there. There's a Whole Foods, and yeah, it's dope. There's a lot of English brands that I really love. But one thing that's interesting is it does seem that it's a little bit sort of behind the U.S. in terms of the sort of health trends and just the overall embrace of wellness culture, which may be for better or worse. But on the other hand, last I checked the data, you're doing better than we are with regards to the ultra-processed foods. Like you're consuming fewer of them by proportion than we are here in the United States. I think it's about 50% of your average adult's calorie intake comes from ultra-processed foods in the UK. It's like 60% or higher here in the United States.
That's interesting. I know that years ago, I want to say it's 2010 or 2012, there was the sugar tax on beverages, where they started taxing high sugar beverages companies, and they then reduced the sugar amount, which led to significant public health improvements, particularly in a child population and reducing the risk of childhood obesity. But that is interesting to know that the overall percentage of UPFs is less in a UK diet, because, I've seen some of the foods that we sell, sausage rolls and bangers and mash, and the English breakfast is isn't the heart healthiest of stuff. And do you have that with the black pudding as well?
Oh, I love it.
Oh wow! Okay, so
it's so good.
Looking
I'm not
at
saying
that,
it's healthy, but
yeah,
it's like
I'm looking at that. I'm surprised those percentages, but I don't know why. Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, it's so good. Well, yeah, I mean, your work is so great. It's so all encompassing. Is there anything else we can cover while you're here? Because I know we don't get you to this side of the pond all that often.
No, I think I don't know. Like, I think fiber is seeing like its new wave right now. Like years ago, fiber was integrated into some of these cereals, and fiber-rich bran flakes and things like that. And it seemed like a 60s, 70s, 80s thing. And then like the noughties and 2010s, and even now, it's just dominated by protein enriched everything. And I feel that, and even now we're seeing this new wave of fiber, but mainly in fiber-enriched food. And I feel that the problem is that all these things are great, and food-enriched functional foods makes things more accessible. But I still feel that someone shouldn't think that they can take a food that has fiber, like a fiber bar that has one type of cheap fiber, and because they've had that, they then don't need to have some fruits, right? So I get the idea. You're making fiber more accessible, or protein more accessible, but that shouldn't replace your salmon or your chickpeas or your steak. It's not a this or that. It's a this and that.
I like that approach.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. I see often there are these camps, where it's like the focus is entirely fiber or the focus is entirely protein. But I think it's important to have both. And yeah, we have to, appreciate fortified foods as just that. I mean, they're typically ultra processed, and I do think that they're better than perhaps they're better than the unfortified alternatives, right?
Yeah, I would say they are to a degree. Just make sure the sort of calories stack up and the price points stack up. And this may be quite interesting because it's relatively recently that I was digging into the research on this. It's like, to your point, protein and fiber are both important and they shouldn't go head to head. But if we over-index on protein to the detriment of fiber and we shift the balance, what can happen from a biological point of view is that most of the protein that we consume is hopefully absorbed in the small intestine, right, before it reaches the colon. If you're excessively consuming high protein diets, like, we know that about 1.6 grams of protein per kilo is like probably as good as it gets to maximize muscle protein synthesis. If you're consuming in abundance of that, like, for your weight and height and activity levels, you're consuming 250 grams of protein a day. Some of that excess protein isn't absorbed in the small intestine, makes its way to the colon, where the bacteria, your gut microbiome, are now exposed to a flood of protein that they're not used to. They can sometimes switch modes from fermenting fiber and their native saccharolytic fermentation is what it's called, to then switch on to proteolytic or putrefactive fermentation, and they start fermenting protein. And the byproducts of protein fermentation is indoles, ammonia, precresol, and other pro-inflammatory toxic metabolites, which can actually continue to loosen that gut lining so you get leaky gut symptoms and continue to contribute to a pro-inflammatory state.
Are you describing the science underlying protein farts?
I guess in a way, yes.
I mean, you're describing all the molecular, potentially pro-inflammatory effects, but they also, like anybody who shifts their diet to a dramatically, higher level of protein knows that it can sometimes lead to GI upset.
And actually, continuing that thread, high protein and then low fiber, when they're switching modes to protein fermentation, and when you don't give them protein, guess what is proteinaceous inside your body? You. Your gut lining is protein. So the bacteria start to digest and nibble on your gut lining, which contributes to that intestinal hyperpermeability and leaky gut symptoms.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely eat a high protein diet, but I would say that I fall pretty much like in line with that recommendation, the 1.6 grams of protein per kilogram, which I think, if you do the math, it's something like it's like 0.72 grams of protein per pound, of body weight. That's super, super useful, super important stuff. The fortification of protein, there's greenwashing that occurs, and a lot of foods that claim to be ultra-processed foods that claim to be high in protein, typically they're not. But I do think like ultimately having more protein in an ultra-processed food, it's going to lend itself to maybe a smidgen higher in terms of its satiety value.
Yes, I would argue looking at the source of protein. Because, if that protein bar or protein shake you're consuming or that protein porridge is actually rich in collagen protein, it depends, because that's a cheap protein source. We know it barely moves the needle when it comes to muscle gain and muscle protein synthesis. And so if you're consuming that protein for muscle recovery, that collagen is virtually doing nada.
That's true. Yeah. Yes. Super important stuff. Important nuance that I think is often under-discussed. Well, this was so fun. Thanks for coming out.
Thanks for having me, man, and hopefully back soon as well in the U.S. soil.
Yeah, hope so. I've got one last question for you, but before we get to that, where can people find you on social media? I know that you are ubiquitous on the social networks, but maybe drop your handles and how people can support.
I am Dr. Karan Rajan everywhere.
Everywhere. Easy peasy. What does living a genius life mean to you?
I think it's having balance so I can still have fun and continue to improve my health day on day and realize that I'm not perfect and I can continue to up-level and upskill my knowledge when it comes to health. Beautiful. Well said. Well, thanks for coming out again. I hope at some point, in the not too distant future, I end up on your side of the pond once more. And thank you to everybody who's tuned in. Love you, appreciate you, and I will catch you on the next episode. Peace. Hey, if you liked that video, you need to check out this one here, and I'll see you there.